Hi everyone, I'm Tom Fitton, Judicial Watch President, with our weekly update here on Facebook Live. Thanks for joining us this week. A lot, as always, to discuss. It's a busy period with the new president and the legal fights and attacks because of his new policies. And of course, Judicial Watch has its own independent investigations and litigation going on, which makes the work even more busy. We've been all over the media, obviously, in response to this outrageous Ninth Circuit ruling late last night. You may have caught us on Hannity, on Fox News last night. If you haven't, the link should be available on our YouTube channel or on our website as well, or Facebook. You know where to find links like that, but we're putting them up there. And I'll talk about that today. I'll talk about this new lawsuit we have over refugee loans. You may not know this, but we give loans to refugees with your money when they get here. And there's no way of tracking that. And then there's a lot of news as well in California for a different type of corruption with Eric Holder, the corrupt Attorney General under Barack Obama. And you're not going to like the news there. And then finally, there's information out there, and there's a big controversy over what Kellyanne Conway, President Trump's White House advisor, said with respect to Ivanka's clothing line. So, believe it or not, the media have been very interested in what Judicial Watch has to say on the topic, so I'll share that with you. First up, though, is the constitutional crisis caused by judges overstepping their authority under the Constitution. I know the respected class here in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere are all a tizzy over the fact that President Trump is attacking the courts for undermining his prerogatives as President of the United States. And I don't mean illegal prerogatives like President Obama asserted. I'm talking about core constitutional prerogatives, like under the Constitution and the statutes passed by Congress, being charged with making sure that bad guys don't get here into the United States, especially from terrorist-producing countries like Yemen and Syria, where there are no central governments, and we really can't verify the identity or backgrounds of anyone, let alone refugees or visa applicants or other visitors. And so you've had the courts attacking him, and you've had the liberal Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals last night upholding a lower court ruling that resulted in a temporary restraining order for all of President Trump's executive order as it relates to foreign immigrant travel to the United States from these terrorist-infected states. It was severe and dangerous constitutional and judicial overreach by the courts. The president shouldn't be second-guessed by the courts. They're not constitutionally able, and they're not designed to do so in terms of his evaluation of what constitutes the sort of systems we need to have in place to make sure bad guys aren't coming here from these terrorist states. I remember what the executive order was. It was a temporary pause for visitors and certainly a rethinking of the refugee vetting process because of the terrorist threat from these specific areas. And the federal court in the Ninth Circuit said he can't do any of that because there are some students in Washington State who go to a public university who might be hampered by it. So as a result, nothing can be done. And I think that description itself should tell you there's something seriously wrong with the court that asserts that type of power. And I tell you, it's good to see a president defend his constitutional prerogatives. He has obligations to us under the Constitution, and he should be diligent in defending any illicit encroachment on those obligations from the other branches of government. Just as the Congress has independent obligations under the Constitution, the first branch, Congress, they should be defending encroachments from the other branches of government. And the judicial branch needs to understand its role in our constitutional system, and if they want to be politicians, they should resign and run for office and not try to legislate from the branch. This was an anti-Trump tirade. It wasn't a legal decision, in my view, because it really doesn't hold up legally. I'm not a lawyer, but I've been around the block long enough on these legal issues to know bad court opinions when I see them, and this was terrible. Now, whether it gets overturned by the Supreme Court, no guarantee of that. So Trump is going to have to the president's going to figure out how to deal with this court ruling. He may have to modify his executive order so at least he gets some sensible policing in place. Judicial Watch has done excellent work on this refugee issue. We've uncovered threats acknowledged by the Obama administration from terrorists taking advantage of this refugee system. And you may not know this, but we don't vet refugees. We get the UN to do the initial vetting. And then we take their files and we go and ask these refugees additional questions. Does that sound like a sensible system to you? Of course not. And that's why the president was right to put a pause on the system till we figure it out if we have all of our ducks in a row so that we're not put at risk as a result of terrorist attacks. So we've got this crisis now. The court's substituting their will for their judgment for the considered judgment of the President of the United States as to who should enter the country. And the court even is seeming to suggest that anyone who wants to enter the country may have a chance to go to court and get their problems or their concerns heard because Trump can't do anything in that regard. This anti-Trumpism is out of control, and I've talked last week about the alt government. We've got the Trump administration where the Trump policies are being implemented. I don't agree with everything Mr. Trump is going to want to do, I suspect, or even probably everything he has done. But I did not pay for, and the law doesn't allow to have an alt government in place either in the federal bureaucracy to oppose his policies, and certainly just because the courts may disagree with Mr. Trump politically, they can't abuse their powers to go after him using their public office. The powers of the court, the powers entrusted to the courts are awesome by the American people, so to see their abuse is troubling, and I think we saw their abuse this week. So we'll be continuing to track this issue. We're investigating the refugee issue. We're investigating the opposition and to the rule of law here, and you can trust us to call it as we see it here, because we're going to be asking questions everyone else is afraid to ask, and we'll participate in the court battles where we can, but we're going to be asking questions in surprising places, so stay tuned for that. Along those lines, we filed a lawsuit this week on the refugee loan program. So what happens is we essentially give money to the United Nations, who then gives loans to refugees here present in the United States. And we were interested to know, is there any way of tracking to see if these loans are paid back? And if they're not, are we tracking which loans aren't paid back and how much money we're winning or losing? So we asked for this information, let's see, in 2016, February 5th, 2016, a little over a year ago. Didn't get any response from the Obama administration. So we sued the Trump administration. Hopefully we get some response. But the International Organization for Migration, you ever hear of that before? Probably not. It's now a UN entity. It's based in Geneva. Has an annual budget of $1.4 billion. And the organization provides interest-free loans furnished by the Department of State to all refugees arriving in the United States. So this is a wonderful thing we have here. And we've got, obviously, the government running it, so it's going to be rife with fraud. Even the Washington Post reported that 9 resettlement agencies contracted by the State Department to help resettle refugees in the U.S. actually make more than $5 million a year in commissions on refugee debt collection. So if they're making money on debt collection, what is the debt? And what is the debt that isn't collected? Those are the source of stats we want to know. And as I said to the media, they stonewalled this for a year. This is basic information. They have the data easily available. And that just screams cover up. And this is an opportunity for the Trump State Department, and this is why we do Freedom of Information Act lawsuits. We want to get the documents, but we also want to draw attention to the issue. So when we ask about refugee resettlement loans, we obviously want the documents, but we also want the American people to know that the government's involved in this program, and the program deserves oversight and accountability, and that's what we're trying to do here. And, the loans, some other loans are up to $15,000 for refugees. So this is the refugee program. There's no control. If you live in a state, you don't want a refugee there, no problem. There's nothing you can do. A refugee comes here, they can live anywhere they want, which makes a certain amount of sense, but that's the reality of it. And there's really no serious vetting of the refugees, as I described earlier. They get taxpayer money and access to all sorts of benefits. In addition to that, taxpayer benefits, once they're here. And you know this? It's not temporary. They're here forever. Because what is required under law is that a refugee here for a year is required to apply for permanent residency. And presuming they get permanent residency, after a period of time they're eligible for citizenship. So this is not a refugee system in any traditional moral sense of the word. There's no temporary refuge here where people can shelter here in the United States so they can go back home. No. This is a program to bring immigrants into the United States and allow them to stay here and then bring all their family members here at great expense to you. And we have, and it doesn't matter where they're coming from, and we don't ask them any questions in a severe way to figure out if they're bad guys or not. And then once they're here, it's virtually impossible to track where they are. So no wonder President Trump wants to pause on the program so we can figure out what the heck is going on. And so I hope he pursues these issues further, whether it be for perfecting his executive order, litigating it further in the courts, and otherwise educating the American people about this. Because despite all the blather you're hearing out of Washington about this, and all the concern and the politics you're seeing in the courts, my guess is the American people support policies like this. So, and certainly as we're supporting of the rule of law and always wanted a rule of law approach to immigration and a national security oriented approach to immigration, it seems to me these policies are sensible that Trump is proposing. Arguably they could go a lot further. Other big news was I was on CNN this morning in a spirited discussion with Chris Cuomo talking about the Trump ethics rules in the White House. And Kellyanne Conway got into trouble this week because she was on Fox and Friends. And as you know, the left is attacking the Trump family, and the concern is that they're going after her through her businesses, and Nordstrom and other companies are pulling back. They're saying, pulling her lines off, saying that they're not making money, and President Trump is suspicious of that and has complained. And Kellyanne Conway, in an over-exuberant way, said, well, I'm going to buy Ivanka's clothes, or something like that. Kind of like a free commercial for her clothing line. Well, the rules of the ethics rules of the federal government, and which apply to Kellyanne, are that she can't talk like that. She can't provide a commercial advertisement for someone's product. Now, she violated the rules, yes, and she should be reminded what the rules are, and let's move on. And I disagree that there's a criminal investigation needed or that she needs to be fired, which is ridiculous. If this is the biggest deal in terms of ethics we get ahead of the Trump White House, then we're lucky. And supposedly the president talked to her about it, or someone in the White House talked to her about it and let her know again what the rules are. And this is an opportunity for the White House just to make sure everyone knows what the rules are, because the Trump family and the Trump organization is always going to be attacked. And so the temptation is defend the business, but you can't do it in an appropriate way by telling Americans to go and use the business. So don't tell, if the Trump hotels are attacked, the White House can't come out and say, you should go to the Trump hotels to fight back. They can say it shouldn't be attacked, but they can't promote it in a commercial way, even if it's not really a commercial way, even though it's kind of a political debate, but you see my point. So this is going to be, the left has been using this to gum up President Trump, and even Jason Chaffetz has asked for an investigation, which I don't buy into. I don't know what there is to investigate. It's a disciplinary issue for the White House. It's obvious what she said, and she shouldn't say it again publicly or things like that. So folks wanted Judicial Watch's point of view there. We are in favor of ethics and integrity in our nation's public life. And when public officials say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, there's got to be appropriate accountability. And I think, that's what we want for Kellyanne Conway, but let's not pretend it's the gravest sin in the world. And we're not going to go out there and just start yelling about Trump to make liberals feel good about Judicial Watch. We're just going to call it as we see it. We're going to promote the rule of law. And when things are wrong in a serious way, you'll hear it from us here first. And along those lines, we exposed some more crony corruption out in California. And it's all tied to this war on Trump, by the way. So the California legislature is spending money to hire Eric Holder, the disgraced Attorney General of Barack Obama, Holder, the only Attorney General to have been held in contempt of Congress, is working for the California State Legislature on issues related to legal strategies regarding potential actions of the federal government that may be of concern to the state of California. Now, that's sanctuary cities, that's opposing Trump's efforts to roll back the insane climate change agenda based on fraud science, and other actions by the Trump administration to roll back the outlaw gangster government regulatory state. And so the California State Legislature is using your tax dollars to pay this Obama crony. Now, we filed a Freedom of Information Act request. Now, you're hearing a train. Our office is next to the train track, so you're going to hear the reality of Washington every once in a while. They do have trains here in Washington. So we filed a Freedom of Information Act request to the California State Legislature, which is great. You know why? Because the state legislature is subject to FOIA in part. It'd be good if Congress were too. Raise that the next time. Go to these town halls where all these progressives are going and ask your members of Congress why they're not subject to FOIA like the California State Legislature is. You'll get some fun answers there. Well, anyway, we filed this legislative open records request, and we got the Holder contract. And it's for $25,000 a month for 40 hours of work, strictly for providing these legal strategies I talked about. And of course, he's there meeting with the governor of California, and the Attorney General of California, and I think California state legislators, I'm sure at great cost to you, the taxpayer in California. And what's outrageous about it is the state legislature already has lawyers. They have a $190 million budget. A $190 million budget for the lawyers that already represent and are able to pursue litigation on behalf of the California State Legislature. So this is crony corruption, pure and simple. This is a group of politicians giving money to a corrupt politician, and it's a scandal, and we're not done with it. We're going to keep on pursuing it. And those of you who don't remember Eric Holder, I would have you remember this. Fast and Furious, that's what he was held in contempt for. His refusal to turn over documents about his lies to Congress about Fast and Furious, a scandal which he approved, a program which he approved which alleged to the deaths of hundreds of Mexicans and U.S. Border Patrol agent Brian Terry. And then, of course, Holder ruined the Justice Department when it came to the enforcement of civil rights. He suppressed the Black Panther investigation, and he had a racially biased way of applying the law. Really terrible Attorney General, about as political as you can get. He voted. He had this. He was on this jihad against all voter integrity measures. Sued all these states that wanted to do voter ID by alleging falsely all sorts of racial, terrible racial motivations. So a real race hustler, this Eric Holder, corrupt and disgraced and pushed out of office, frankly, in part because of Judicial Watch's work. You can read more about that online because we forced out documents that kind of were the beginning of the end for him. And now he's working for the California State Legislature in a make-work job, taking care of, spending money to take care of the corrupt Eric Holder. It's just really outrageous, and we're glad to be able to expose it and get the media to pay attention to it. So this is an example of us not even having to sue, but to simply ask for the records and get the records, and then the media looks at it and they say, well, this is interesting. Why is Eric Holder getting $25,000 a month to represent a state legislature of California that spends nearly $200 million a year already on lawyers? So this is something worth pursuing and worth tracking, and we are not finished with this story yet either. So a lot going on. I may have gone on too long today, but we've got the crisis over the Ninth Circuit's ruling on President Trump's executive order. I think Trump is going to pursue appeals on that, and he may come up with new executive orders in the meantime, and I think that would be a good thing to do. I think I highlighted those options on Fox Business today, and there should be a link to that video up as well. And then we've got this new lawsuit on refugee loans, all part of the mix. are exposing Holder's involvement in the war on Trump and with the waste of taxpayer monies there. And then we're analyzing for you the ethics of whether or not Kellyanne Conway can be promoting Ivanka Trump's clothing line. Obviously she can't, but it isn't the ethics crisis that the left is making it out to be. She shouldn't do it anymore, and she's been appropriately told, you can't do it anymore, but there's nothing wrong with defending the family, but you can't go there. So it's going to be an interesting next few years with the Trump family business, how it intersects with the president. And to be fair, you know, they're going to be legitimate questions that are raised because we've never had this type of situation before, and those conflicts of interest are not necessarily small, and they won't necessarily go away, and it can be laughed away because the left is asking the questions. They're something that they have to be grappled with, and it doesn't mean the president has to destroy his business and sell everything in order to avoid the conflicts of interest, but we should be aware and police them, because the temptation sometimes is to break the rules because you think it's no big deal, or your intent isn't bad, because we just have to enforce the rule of law no matter what. So with that, I appreciate your time and attention, and we'll see you next week. Again, I'm Tom Fitton with The Train and President Judicial Watch, and we'll see you next week here on Facebook Live with our weekly update.